The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. They're accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity during the war in Gaza. The court also issued a warrant for the head of Hamas's armed wing, Mohammed Deif, over the attacks on October 7th. Netanyahu has condemned the accusations against himself as disgraceful and anti-Semitic. U.S. President Joe Biden has called the warrant outrageous. But other governments say they would be obliged to arrest the Israeli premier if he entered their countries.
They are on the arrest list of the International Criminal Court. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Both are charged with directing attacks on civilian populations and using starvation as a weapon of war. Netanyahu described the move as anti-Semitic.
The truth is simple. No war is more just than the war that Israel has been waging in Gaza after Hamas attacked us unprovoked, launching the worst massacre against the Jewish people since the Holocaust.
The ICC charges were met with outrage in Israel.
This doesn't really have any validity. Netanyahu and the Israeli Defense Force are doing their very, very, very best for the state of Israel.
These are not war crimes. Any other state would have done it and worse.
And in war-torn Gaza, there was skepticism.
We, the Palestinian people, the majority of our community, feel we cannot place much trust in the International Criminal Court. We've endured wars, massacres, grief and pain because of Netanyahu. Experience has shown us that these courts have been established mainly to enforce arguments and laws on weaker countries. It's clear that these charges will never be enforced because no measures in favor of the Palestinian people are ever implemented. Decisions against the Palestinian people are immediately put into action, while those in favor of the Palestinian cause are impossible to enforce.
Israel has rejected the court's jurisdiction and denies committing war crimes in Gaza. The United States has also expressed deep concerns over the court's decision.
We fundamentally reject the court's decision to issue arrest warrants for senior Israel officials. We remain deeply concerned by the prosecutor's rush to seek arrest warrants and the troubling process errors that led to this decision.
Neither Israel nor the U.S. are members of the ICC. It is, however, backed by 124 signatory states, including all nations belonging to the European Union. Joseph Borrell, the EU's top diplomat, reminded all 27 member countries of their duty to abide by the court's ruling.
This decision is a binding decision, and all states parties of the court, which include all members of the European Union, are binding to implement this court decision.
Israel's leader, meanwhile, says he will not be deterred until Israel's war objectives are met.
Rosie Birchard is outside the court in The Hague in the Netherlands. Rosie, walk us through this. What does the arrest warrant against Netanyahu and Gallant say exactly?
Well, judges here at the International Criminal Court say they have reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant are responsible for war crimes, including using starvation as an act of warfare and intentionally targeting civilians, and also for crimes against humanity, including murder and persecution. Now, in the statement, the International Criminal Court says they have reasonable grounds to believe that both men intentionally deprived the civilian population of objects needed for their survival, and they reference food, they reference electricity, access to medical supplies, and also instances of doctors having to perform surgery without access to anaesthesia. These are allegations the two men vehemently deny, but judges here say there's a case to be answered, and so they are now internationally wanted men.
There is a third warrant. We saw the man that has been issued against there on the screen just briefly there for our viewers, so they get some context there and know who that was. Can you tell us a little more about Mohammed Deif and what he's warranted for?
He is a military commander in Hamas, and a warrant is out for his arrest for his role in the October 7th Hamas terror attacks and the situation for hostages taken since then. Now, one thing important to know right at the top is that it's not clear whether this man is alive. Israel says he was killed during the summer, but Hamas hasn't confirmed that, and therefore the court says they can't confirm it, and so they have gone on to issue this warrant, which is indeed for crimes against humanity and war crimes, including targeting civilians, including the crime of extermination and of taking hostages, and also crimes including rape and other forms of sexual violence in relation to the experiences of hostages which still remain taken by Hamas ever since October 7th last year.
Rosie, the ICC's warrant is binding to all signatories of the Rome Statute, and that includes all EU countries. How do you think that will impact the bloc's relationship with Israel? Do you see member states implementing the court's decision and arresting Netanyahu?
Well, listen, this is teeing up some real diplomatic dilemmas lying ahead, because all EU member states are obliged to arrest Netanyahu should he turn up on their territory. But we've seen some division among EU member states already, with Austria's foreign minister calling this something which damages the credibility of the court. Meanwhile, Josep Borrell, the EU's top diplomat, reminding member states that they are obliged to implement this decision.
That's DW's Rosie Birchard. Thank you so much.
Well, I spoke with the ICC's former president, Chile, Eboe-Osuji. I asked him for his response to claims that the ICC's decision is anti-Semitic.
It is not anti-Semitic. Of course, it is to be expected that people who face these processes will deploy that kind of political argument as a last resort. When the ICC was prosecuting the leaders of Kenya for the post-election violence in Kenya, ICC was called a racist, a tool of neocolonialism and all that. And so this is nothing new. The more intelligent thing for people to do is to respect international law. All these people know what international law is, but sometimes they want to brave it, thinking that they're powerful enough to overcome it, and international law doesn't work. Now we see that that's not quite the case.
The ICC, we know, relies on state cooperation. I want to ask you, as journalists, we cannot travel to Gaza to independently verify information that is given to us by either the IDF or the Hamas-led health ministry in Gaza, for example. How does the ICC, how does it have access to the evidence that it needs to justify arrest warrants?
Well, this is a matter really for the intricacies of the office of the prosecutor. I used to be a prosecutor myself many years ago at International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And they do have the offices of the prosecutors of these mechanisms have their ways of obtaining evidence, which not always known to the public, but eventually they do gather information that can come from cooperation of states, that can come from what you see yourself, which they have other ways of verifying and confirming. There are very many ways of doing that. And there are witnesses who will give evidence, and witnesses who will be put in safe houses and all that. So there are ways of corroborating the evidence. The important thing here is that the judges looked at the evidence presented and felt that on the basis of that evidence, they could move forward.
You know the situation in the world right now. You know the limitations of your court. The power of the ICC, some have argued, has been its ability to name and shame when it issues an arrest warrant. And yet we've seen with leaders such as the Russian President Vladimir Putin, when an arrest warrant is issued, he has not become the international pariah that some expected would be the result of that warrant. Now we're seeing the leader of Israel and a leader of Hamas facing an arrest warrant. Are you concerned that in the current geopolitical atmosphere that we live in, that the power of the court is being eroded by its inability to execute what it wants?
Absolutely not. The power of the ICC is not about naming and shaming. This is about the law. And the law is about the obligation of states parties, and there are 124 states parties, to arrest people that the ICC judges have issued arrest warrants against. So that is an obligation. It's a legal obligation on 124 states of the world. And the ICC's obligation is to do its job. Its job is to prosecute people, whatever other political incidents or political derivatives that may come out of it will take care of themselves in the political sphere. But ICC is about the law of the matter. We need to constrain its focus on that and not expand it in a way as to say, well, if we expanded it and it didn't work, then ICC would have failed. That's not the job of the ICC. The job of the ICC is to hold people accountable on the basis of the law. That must be stressed with emphasis.
Mr. Chile Eboe-Osuji, the former president of the ICC, we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us on what has been a very busy day, I'm sure, for you. We appreciate your insights tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, joining me now from The Hague is lawyer Yael Gvirsman. She represents hundreds of Israeli victims of the October 7th Hamas terror attacks. Yael, it's good to have you on the program tonight. Firstly, I'd like to get your reaction to the decision by the International Criminal Court today. Are these arrest warrants, are they part of the justice that you are seeking for your clients?
Yes, thank you for having me, Brent. Absolutely. So today, the International Criminal Court at The Hague issued two separate decisions. I'd like to underline that because that is significant for the victims I'm representing, the victims of the horrid Hamas attacks that began on the 7th of October, but that are still continuing as long as hostages are in Gaza. And victims are raising their eyes towards their hope towards this court, so that they are recognized as victims of international crimes, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So this is definitely a very significant decision. An arrest warrant against Mohammed Deif, who Israel thinks is presumably dead. However, for the court, this is a valid arrest warrant. And at the same time, in a separate decision, the International Criminal Court issued two arrest warrants, one against Prime Minister Netanyahu and the other against former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And of course, this decision is received with mixed feelings, of course. But the direct victims are, they're very hopeful with the first decision against Mohammed Deif because these crimes have to be recognized.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. I can imagine that the arrest warrants for two Israeli leaders reverberate differently for your clients than the arrest warrant for the Hamas military chief, Mohammed Deif.
Absolutely. The thing is to understand is that the ICC prosecutor's initial declaration in May that he is requesting 5 arrest warrants, 3 against Hamas leaders and 2 against the heads of, head Israeli figures, was this declaration this statement was made in the same breath. And this decision, although I could understand the pressures and so forth, was received with a very big regret by myself and my clients, the direct victims of Hamas attacks, because in fact, it was obvious that the effect would be 100% focus against an arrest warrant requested against a democracy that is in war, against a head of state that is not a state party of the International Criminal Court. Whereas if the decision, this statement would have, at 8 a.m., if he could have declared an intention to issue an arrest warrants against 3 Hamas leaders, and at 9 a.m., an intent for the other requests, then my victims would have had their hour. And today they have their hour. And I really hope that we continue with these separate procedures, because these are separate facts, separate evidence, and different victims.
Well, yeah, let me ask you, was there any way that you could have were you able to ask the court, maybe when it did make its announcement about these arrest warrants, that it could announce them separately? I mean, is there any type of legal procedure that allows you to make that request?
That was exactly my request on 12th of August. I issued the views and concerns that I issued at the invitation of the court. I issued views and concerns of victims of Hamas attacks, and we asked that justice be made. We asked that justice be seen to be made, and we asked that any decision be founded and be issued separately.
Did you get an answer?
And well, the answer is really by actions. We see that the pretrial chamber followed our request. We are the only ones who requested this, and the decisions are published in two separate press releases, which I think is already significant, even though the timing is identical. Nevertheless, at least we're making a step forwards.
Yeah, your point is well taken. I saw the two separate press releases, but you are correct. The news of the day definitely starts with the arrest warrants for a sitting Israeli prime minister. I'm wondering, how do your clients see the arrest warrant for Mohammed Deif in view of the fact that Israel says that he's dead and Hamas says he's not dead? Let me ask, let's assume he is dead. Then will this be more symbolism for your clients? I mean, what kind of justice can be reached if he's dead?
Well, it's a valid concern that many victims share. And if he is dead, then these arrest warrants would not fly. They would be withdrawn. However, from the very first days, we know that the road to justice is a long way forward. When the prosecutor declared his intention to request arrest warrants against 3 Hamas leaders, we were very happy. It was a moment of a milestone reached. However, for us, it was already symbolic, and it was definitely not the final aim. We want the 20 most responsible Hamas leaders, those who are sitting in Europe, who are sitting very happily and contently while their own people are dying in Gaza because of their decisions and so much bloodshed. So these are the people we want. We knew that the heads, the first 3, they had very little chances of arriving to the bench of the accused. However, the others sitting much more comfortably, we're aiming at that, and we have amazing experts at our sides who are committed as much as we are for this long journey of justice.
Are you expecting then more arrest warrants to be issued for those other Hamas leaders?
Absolutely. We've been in direct contact with the investigators of the ICC since October, when we issued the first complaint that was communicated in the name of Hamas victims to the court at the ICC. And since then, we've been in direct contact. We are transferring evidence. Till this day, the prosecutor has not investigated on the ground. And so that can't replace a visit on the ground, investigation on the ground. But our active involvement is substantial. And we've been accompanying key witnesses, survivors as well, to provide testimony to the court.
I'm sure you're aware that the reaction from the Israeli prime minister today, he said that these arrest warrants were anti-Semitic, implying that the ICC has a more compassionate ear for the Palestinians than it does for the Israeli victims of the terror attacks. I want your opinion. What have you experienced there at the ICC in terms of the court treating all people, all parties equally?
Look, what is in the hearts and minds of people is difficult to know. Also, judges sitting in domestic courts. However, let us recognize that this is a decision with gravity, severe gravity, to be named as suspects in arrest warrant. Someone who has an arrest warrant for crimes against humanity and war crimes. For someone with our history and our identity, Israelis is very grave, and it cannot be undermined. So it is very understandable that these arrest warrants are received even with shock and horror by the Israeli population. And this is true despite the fact that in Israel, society is not equal on its stands and on its positions on a ceasefire or the need of war and so forth. There was no doubt that this war was imposed on us. We did not choose it. It is a war of no choice. But in terms of the length of the war and so forth, and the needs and the stake of the hostages, there is, of course, if anyone is looking at the street in Israel, then there is, of course, great disruption and unease within Israeli society.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you. I just spoke with the former president of the ICC, and I asked him this question. He said that the arrest warrants have absolutely nothing to do with anti-Semitism. He says the decision was not anti-Semitic. Absolutely not, he said. Can you say the same thing? Do you feel that these decisions today, these arrest warrants, were issued with no anti-Semitism involved?
I think this is a court of law. There's procedures, there's a level of evidence, and the procedure for arrest warrants are only one-sided. They're ex parte. Only the prosecution and the chambers, the judges and the prosecution sit together, and there's no defense at all. This is the same in every case. I'm not convinced personally that anti-Semitism is at the root of this, and I also don't think that the response is to deal with anti-Semitism. The response needs to be substantial, legal. There are good legal arguments. The court practically said, even though it hasn't given a final word on this, that it is not convinced that Israel has the inquiry commission in place or the capacity or the will to try and to investigate and to try the same persons for the same conduct as the persons under the focus of the court. So the response from Israel is it can be very actually efficient. It needs to be relevant. Besides that, there will always be this politicized reality. And I see it from the side of the victims I represent. And I'm really we are all working hard for us to see the victims and not all of this, ostensibly politicized situation, reality.
We understand. Yael Gvirsman, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I know it's been a very, very busy day for you as well as for your clients. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.